Welcome back to the deep dive. This is the place where we take these really complex, sometimes dense stacks of sources, and we just try to boil them down.
Right, so you can walk away feeling like you actually get it, not just that you've heard a summary.
Exactly. And our mission today is, well, it's a genuinely fascinating one. We are diving deep into the modern landscape of horror fiction.
hmm Specifically, we're looking at how today's authors are using the genre. It's not just for jump scares anymore. It's become this vehicle for really complex, psychological, and often deeply personal stories.
That's it. Our source material for this is it's this rich collection of essays, narrative fragments, and some really deep analytical notes from, the people who are building modern horror.
So this deep dive is basically your shortcut. It's a way to understand the genre's biggest themes right now.
Yeah, things like how the supernatural kind of disguises itself as the mundane, or how personal, unprocessed trauma, how that breeds these new, very specific kinds of monsters.
And also the literary techniques themselves, the architecture authors are using to build a sense of genuine, lasting dread.
So the goal for you listening isn't just to get a list of monsters, it's to really unpack the sophisticated literary structure that's being used to turn everyday anxiety
Right, or unresolved guilt.
into this profound existential horror. We're moving way beyond the predictable stuff that really dominated horror for a long time.
And to get there, we really need to set the stage. The sources give us some critical historical context here. You have to remember what the genre was like around the late 1980s.
Oh yeah, the golden age of the mass market paperback.
It was, but the creativity, it was often lacking, to put it mildly.
There's a great anecdote in the sources about Peter Straub, who was always trying to elevate literary horror. He complained because his publisher slapped this dripping severed head on his new paperback cover, and the publisher's response was just crushingly dismissive.
He just said, Peter, that book isn't for people like you. And that one line, it just perfectly captures the crisis. It signaled this huge commercialization and with it, a degradation of the entire category.
The message was so clear. If you were a thoughtful reader or a writer with nuanced ideas.
You weren't the target audience, no.
So the market just got flooded with these, uninspired titles, all these predictable, sometimes nonsensical horror tropes.
Which led to total genre fatigue. And that's where that amazing, slightly unhinged joke comes from, the one that just sums up the whole era's exhaustion.
Oh, I love this. Describing a new release as
underwater, lesbian Nazi vampire turtles.
It's just a spectacular vision of genre decay.
It really is. And the result was this declaration in the early 90s that, quote, horror was a house that horror had already moved out of.
The whole creative space just felt vacant, full of, predictable furniture and cardboard ghosts.
Exactly. And it was just ripe for renovation by writers who were willing to redefine its entire foundation.
So let's start there, with this crisis of category, this mass market approach, the publisher's decision to just flood the horror shelf with titles that were purely commercial.
Yeah, often driven entirely by the cover art. It just diluted the quality so quickly.
The industry basically just reduced the genre to pulp.
And it sidelined any text that was aiming for subtlety or, psychological complexity. That feeling of genre fatigue was so palpable, the whole world of horror in the late 80s felt like it was decaying.
So the house of horror was vacant because it was missing any kind of intellectual ambition.
Right. And to make it scary again, writers had to redefine what the core voice of dread actually sounded like.
What's so fascinating here is how the sources define that voice. It's not by what it says, but by its texture, its location. It's abstract, but also weirdly specific.
Yeah, and we get two extremes that kind of define the modern emotional range of the genre. On one hand, the voice of horror is described as muffled, it's contained, it's pathetic.
The description is so evocative. It's like a tiny insect crying for help from inside a sealed coffin.
Right. That image is just, it's perfect because it's all about that suppressed anxiety.
It's an agony that's physically close, it's trapped, but it's desperately trying to get out. You know it's there, you can hear it, but you're totally powerless to do anything about it.
And that is a sound of internalized, unresolved trauma.
But the modern approach gets that, containment. It rarely lasts forever.
Exactly. Sometimes that brittle exoskeleton just shatters. The suppressed inward horror explodes, and the voice completely transforms. It becomes something external, overwhelming.
A piercing crystal shriek that lacerates the midnight blackness.
So the whole genre today is kind of operating between those two poles. You have the agonizing, suppressed dread of the coffin.
And then the violent, uncontrollable release of that shriek. It's a whole continuum of psychological pain.
And the goal of the contemporary author is to find the literary architecture that can either build that pressure up or trigger the explosion.
So how do they do that? I mean, what are the tools?
Well, to facilitate that continuum, authors tend to rely on one of three foundational literary techniques, and each one demands a different relationship between the reader, the protagonist, and reality itself.
Okay.
The first one is what we're calling the realistic technique.
Let's unpack this. The sources have a great shorthand for it. Doctor Cause and Profess Effect. This is the method for smuggling the supernatural past the guards of normalcy. You're basically trying to trick the reader's rational brain.
And the key rule here is that the supernatural has to go in disguise. It has to follow this causal chain that's so convincing that it's perceived not as a bastard child of reality, but it's legitimized heir.
Right. If a monster just appears out of nowhere, the reader just laughs it off.
Exactly. But if the monster appears because of this internally consistent, logical, albeit very disturbing series of events, then the reader is terrified.
The source uses this brilliant, kind of mundane example. It's the character named Nathan and these mysterious trousers that cause him to rot away below the waist.
And the horror isn't just random decay. It has this disturbing, specific pedigree, a history.
Chain of custody, almost.
Precisely. We're given these required causal links that make the horror feel earned. Cause number one. The trousers were made in a foreign land. South America, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia.
The specificity is deliberately vague, but it's super effective. It leans on the exotic to explain the abnormal. It plays on our rational discomfort with the unknown.
Yeah, you might not believe in, say, a straightforward curse.
Right.
But we do believe in exotic diseases or strange materials or, foreign conditions we don't understand. That distance legitimizes the potential for contamination.
And then cause number two is the really macabre detail.
That the trousers were worn for several hours by a dead man.
On their own, those two facts are just weird. But the narrative links them, and it forces the reader's mind to bridge that gap. We're sort of tricked into accepting causality that's just masquerading as coincidence.
And the power of implication is what really seals the deal. Nathan finds a lottery ticket in the pocket of the pants, he calls the store.
He learns the pants were returned not by the guy who bought them, but by his widow.
Exactly. Which suggests, but doesn't explicitly state, that Nathan is now wearing the garment of a dead man.
The implication forces you, the reader, into this uncomfortable internal transaction. Your common sense gets overridden by the logic of the narrative structure.
So when Nathan loses all hope of achieving full normalcy in reality, we accept the decay. We accept it because the horror has been fully justified by the rules of this specific, subtly corrupted, realistic world.
Okay, so that's the realistic technique. It relies on logic to sneak the monster in. The second approach, though, the traditional Gothic technique, it seems to just throw logic out the window entirely.
It does. It relies on atmosphere. That's why the source calls it the University of Dreams.
So what's the core principle here?
This technique just acknowledges right up front that the world is fundamentally unreal, abnormal, and strange. It openly harbors these essences that are, quote, magic, timeless, and profound.
So you don't need to sneak the monster in.
No, because isolated supernatural incidents don't look silly here. The entire world is already operating under this strange, heightened reality. The baseline is already weird.
And it's not bound by, history or geography. It doesn't need a crumbling castle in the 15th century.
Right. A castle-like skyscraper in the just as mysterious 20th will do just fine. The architecture is less about the actual bricks and mortar and more about a sense of massive psychological or urban incarceration.
It's a feeling, not a place.
And to capture that, the author has to be, as the sources put it, a bit of a lunatic, at least while they're writing.
A bit of a lunatic.
Yeah, they have to be willing to harness the winds of ecstatic hysteria. The author uses what some might dismiss as just inflated rhetoric, but in Gothic terms, that soaring language becomes the sails of the Gothic artist's soul.
It fills up with those hysterical winds and drives the story forward.
Exactly. And the protagonist, too, needs an extra dose of obsessiveness just to match the world's madness.
Okay, so Gothic uses this intense psychological atmosphere to just embrace the abnormality of existence. But what happens when the horror is entirely internal?
That's where we get the third method, the experimental or confessional technique.
But this one is the most intimate, right? The most raw.
It is, because it centers the horror entirely on the protagonist's inner agony. In this narrative form, the main character, who is often just the thinly veiled version of the writer, has to confess to going too far into fear as a discipline.
As a discipline, what does that mean?
It's not about running from a ghost. It's about becoming obsessed with the source of dread itself, almost like a perverse form of self-study or self-dissection.
So this technique, it's almost semi-autobiographical.
It skirts that line, yeah. It embodies this profound personal sorrow, but the agony is that the raw pain resists language. You can't quite put it into words.
So the writer is forced to hide their heart within. What's the phrase? Pseudonyms of pseudonyms.
Layers of fictional disguise, yeah. Which, paradoxically, only heightens the pain because the true source of it remains unexpressed.
It raises a question for me, though. Is the confessional technique just, I don't know, modern self-help disguised as horror?
I would argue no, and the sources back this up. The goal isn't healing. The final stage is a desperate search for oblivion, not resolution.
The only desire becomes seeking human oblivion in a human bed.
Exactly. Grief itself becomes a great sleeping draft. It's not about waking up better. It's about drugging yourself into this noiseless, lightless paradise just to get away from an agonizing universe.
So the horror here is the failure to communicate the cosmic scale of your own pain.
And that failure results in a voluntary erasure of the self.
Wow. Okay, so now let's shift from these abstract techniques to more concrete themes.
Yeah.
And what really stands out in these sources is the absolute centrality of unresolved personal trauma, especially within the family.
Mm-hmm. The house might be empty of old-school monsters, but it is overflowing with the ghosts of guilt.
And our first example, the story of Jean, is just a perfect illustration of how the past actively collapses onto the present.
Jean has constructed what the source calls an illusion of escape. He's built a new life with his wife, Karen, and his son, Frankie. He really believes he has come full circle, that he can start over and do it better than he did in his first life.
His life with Manny and his first son, DJ.
Right. And that timing is so crucial. He feels complete right as Frankie is about to start kindergarten. It's this moment that symbolizes a fresh start, normalcy.
But that feeling of completion is actually the moment the deeply suppressed past is primed to strike. The circle isn't opening up, it's closing in on him.
And his anxiety is immediately linked to these very specific, highly charged, violent memories that are fueled by alcohol.
The Velocirator incident at the carnival.
A core trauma. Jean felt warm and expansive from peppermint schnapps. He thought he was being a good dad, taking DJ on this ride.
But then DJ weeks afterwards. He doesn't want just the fun, he just wants his mom. And Jean's fragile sense of being a good father just collapses into shame.
And shame triggers instant rage. He lashes out with this devastating cruelty, shaming his 5-year-old son.
Let's go home to your mommy, you little crybaby. Look at people are laughing at you.
It's just brutal. They're saying, look at that big boy bawling like a girl.
And that casual, targeted cruelty is a repeating pattern. It's immediately linked to the physical violence he used against Mandy in the past.
He remembers striking her so hard it knocked her out of her chair just because she dared to challenge him or make him feel like an asshole.
So the pattern is crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
His guilt manifests as this aggressive defensive cruelty, and it's always directed at the most vulnerable people in his life.
And that immense suppressed anxiety, it doesn't stay hidden for long. It starts to manifest in his new, supposedly safe family life.
His new wife, Karen, starts flipping through nursing books. She's worried about Frankie's tickling neurological symptom.
And this is where clinical objectivity grounds the creeping anxiety. Dr. Banerjee's diagnosis is crucial here. It validates Karen's fear with medical terminology.
It links the symptom directly to emotional trauma.
Right. So the new life is already showing the strain of the old. And it's diagnosed not by a ghost hunter, but by a physician. This makes the eventual supernatural collapse even more terrifying because we know the damage is already physically present.
And this is where Jean's self-pitying paranoia really kicks in. He's sitting at the roadside, and he's suddenly struck by this idea that Mandy and DJ are dead. And that would explain why they never contacted him.
It's a mechanism to ease his guilt. It's this perverse wish disguised as a premonition, but the narrator points out that he's still just at the mercy of his anxieties.
That anxiety is then amplified and externalized through his new son, Frankie.
Right. Karen mentions Frankie's imaginary playmate, Bubba, and Jean watches Frankie playing, shouting, get him, and dodging behind a tree.
And Jean feels this little shudder, a flicker something. even though Frankie looks nothing like his first son, DJ.
That moment of malice and shouting, that externalized aggression, it triggers this terrifying flicker of recognition.
Which leads us into the full, horrifying recollection of DJ, this
Yeah.
memory that Gene tries to rationalize but just can't control, his malice of memory.
He knows now that the alcohol grotesquely distorted his perceptions and that DJ was just a sad, scared little kid, but the memory itself is still vivid and malevolent.
He remembers DJ being unusually skinny, with a head like a baby bird and these long, bony feet that seemed meant for gripping.
Yeah, and that he would slip barefoot through rooms, always watching. That's not the description of a victim. It's the description of a creeping, unsettling predator.
The most terrifying part is the calculated use of language, the imitation baby talk.
Eyes firsty.
He'd use it to interrupt adult arguments, staring at Gene with what Gene interpreted as calculating hatred. He's just projecting his own fear and anger onto the memory of his child.
And the memory culminates in this devastating physical confrontation. Gene grabs DJ by the neck, whispering, "You're not a baby. You're not fooling anybody."
And his trauma-driven memory insists on DJ's pure malice.
Yeah.
He remembers the child actually baring his teeth, making a thin, hissing whine.
He cannot reconcile the scared victim with the malevolent watcher. His guilt makes them one and the same. He has to make DJ a monster so that he doesn't have to admit that he was the monster.
And the haunting reaches its terrifying climax when Gene wakes up, choking, feeling this swimming, suffocating sensation of being stared at, being watched by something that hates him.
He stumbles out of bed and finds the living room has caught fire.
The details of the fire are crucial. It's not described as, the comforting crackle of wood.
No, it's the amplified sound of tiny creatures eating, little wet mandibles, thousands and thousands of them. It's a noise of consumption, of infestation, of decay. It suggests the house isn't just burning, it's being devoured from the inside out.
And Gene is crawling low, gagging and vomiting, desperately lunging toward the stairs to save Karen and Frankie.
He feels the melting plastic of one of Frankie's action figures stick to his palm. It's this visceral reminder that his attempts at fatherhood and safety are literally melting away.
And then the final vision, the embodiment of all his guilt and destruction.
At the top of the stairs, through the curling fog, the figure of a child watching him grimly, hunched there, its face lit and flickering.
The past, consumed by fire and malevolence, has fully collapsed onto the present, blocking his path to salvation. There is no escape.
So Gene's trauma was the ghost he just couldn't outrun.
But what about trauma that turns outward, that becomes this grotesque, destructive obsession with material remains?
That brings us to Dennis and Elwood's story, the looting of grief.
This one centers on two men who are trying to fill a shared, monumental void, the loss of Misty.
And Dennis even quantified it. He said it was more like 140 pounds of grief. He's trying to make this intangible pain measurable.
So they try to fill that void with distractions. Sports, action movies, and finally, desert archaeology.
Looting the dead to fill the question of, what next?
Their shared endeavor leads to this profound, ancient discovery. Elwood's trowel scrapes against something smooth and brown.
And it reveals an Indian, buried upright in a fetal position, still cocooned in dust and papery skin, with his teeth showing in an eternal snarl.
Dennis's reaction isn't academic awe, though. It's pure, destabilizing agitation. His cheeks glow red. He's pounding his fist.
The source notes it's impossible to tell if he's blissfully happy or simply afraid. The discovery has unlocked that unresolved grief. It's brought death close and made it tangible, which is exactly what they were secretly looking for.
But their possession of this body is immediately challenged.
Kim, a local woman, confronts them. She asks how two white boys ended up with museum-quality redskin shit they don't have any right owning.
Her calm, threatening demeanor is unsettling enough, but then there's this detail. She has an unsettling resemblance to Misty.
When Elwood squints, yeah. And that resemblance is the core horror bridge. The unresolved loss of Misty is actively challenging their attempt to supplant her memory with this archaeological conquest.
The trauma they're trying to replace has literally manifested to demand restitution.
And the confrontation escalates into this disgusting, visceral, physical climax. Dennis, his voice cracking, just descends into outright begging.
Give me the body. I'll give you money, as much as you want. The narrator even captures Elwood's profound disgust and embarrassment at his own father's emotional collapse.
And in the wrestling match that follows, over the corpse, the unthinkable happens.
The fragile, desiccated body breaks in half.
With a soft crack like a popped knuckle, that is just, it's nauseating.
It feels like the universe is physically punishing them for trying to profit from death. This horrific violation scatters chunks of skin and bone and dust across the driveway. The sheer mess of it is the horror.
And the narrative calls this ruin a strange text, which is the ultimate lesson. Their inability to deal with their own loss led to the physical desecration of an ancient body.
And it left behind this profound, messy message of brokenness and misplaced reverence that they can never understand or clean up. Their attempt to loot grief just resulted in a greater, more tangible ruin.
Okay, so from there we move to maybe the most radical psychological breakdown. We're exploring the horror that exists when the stabilizing elements of your life turn out to be deliberate, comforting lies.
This is the story of a protagonist who opens by admitting, I lie, all the time.
Yeah, self-confessed, persistent liar. They lied slyly, innocently, and enthusiastically.
The most elaborate lie mentioned was fabricating that they were half of a pair of Siamese twins, and the other half tragically died during the 1960 presidential election.
So this establishes a lifetime of creating alternate realities, rooted in deep confusion and profound disappointment, just as a coping mechanism.
And this narrative uses a unique spectral entity, the man on the ceiling, to embody the inescapable anxieties of existence. He's always just out of the narrator's understanding, floating above them on layered wings.
He functions as a personalized nihilism. He's the ultimate inner critic.
He shames the protagonist with glimpses into the darkness of human cruelty and shocks them by showing bits of my own face in his.
He is the constant spectral reminder of mortality and futility. He tells the narrator that everyone they love will die and that no one is going to remember me no matter how much I write.
And the horror is hereditary. The daughter suffers from night terrors.
A faceless lady in white who stands by her bed with a knife trying to steal her breath.
The only defense is the dog, Ezra, an animal who was abandoned too, who acts as this literal shield against the terror.
The narrator even acknowledges that the man on the ceiling has already carried one of our children away, which hints at a crushing past loss.
But the truly devastating climax is the confession. The narrator's admission that they fabricated their entire emotional support system just to survive the relentless truth of the man on the ceiling.
They were so terrified of the truth that they created tangible emotional lies. They made up the golden cat Cinnabar who would purr away the pain. They made up the rainbows on the kitchen walls from the prisms.
And then comes the emotional guillotine. The moment the narrative just destroys its own foundation. The narrator reveals that she made up Steve, the partner who seemingly grounded their reality.
The confession is brutal and final. There had never been love. There had never been a miracle.
This technique creates such profound existential horror because it just dissolves the ground beneath your feet as a reader.
If the protagonist can fabricate the deepest, most stable relationships in their life, then the ultimate source of terror is realizing that the world itself is just a provisional structure built on necessary protective lies.
It makes you wonder, if she made up the partner, did she make up the child? Did she make up the house?
The writing itself is an attempt to recover and to write the life back again, different but similar, just to see what happens. The goal of this horror is to make you question the foundation of your own memory.
Okay, so let's move into the territory of body horror and physical transformation. This is where the internal breakdown finds a grotesque physical manifestation.
Exactly. Our first protagonist here, Jane, achieves a highly specific controlled form of ecstasy through entomological transformation.
The genesis of this obsession is, it's both beautiful and haunting. Her earliest memory is of a butterfly mobile, luminous red and blue.
It made the crib seem like fragments of another brighter world.
Years later, she finds the faded plastic mobile, but when a shaft of sun breaks through, the plastic wings ignite in blood red and burning yellow.
And that ignition causes this visceral physical reaction, a total dissolution of her identity. In that instant, it was as though her entire being was burned away.
Nothing remained but the butterflies and her awareness of them, orange and black fluid filling her mouth, the edges of her eyes scored by wings.
It's a moment of profound, painful ecstasy tied to the insect world. It's the blueprint for her future self.
And that potential for metamorphosis is activated by acute trauma. After she is raped and flees to London, she makes a discovery on the plane.
She finds these long, stiff, oddly pliant hair's antennae have grown above her eyebrows. Her violation has led directly to her transformation.
And touching these antennae triggers an ecstatic physical surge.
It's described not as electricity, but like the thrill of pain when a dentist's drill touches a nerve. The sensation is so profound, it leads to a thrumming behind her forehead and a spike of such profound physical ecstasy that she smashes her head against the mirror and climaxes.
She adopts this highly theatrical name, Cleopatra Brimstone, and begins a process of consumption. She uses these ritualized, highly controlled sexual encounters with men.
Her body has become a machine for processing trauma into cruel power.
The crucial element of control in these encounters is her command.
Try to get away.
Right. In the confrontation with one man, Thomas Rayborn, her partner struggles violently, but the bonds hold. As he climaxes, his voice is harsh as though in pain.
And Jean is shaken by spasms, her own antenna tingling almost unbearably. The physical surge only happens when she exerts this total, cruel control over their struggle and their suffering.
Her obsession culminates not with a person, but in the pursuit of the ultimate specimen, the rare, beautiful butterfly Butonitis litterdali.
Native of the eastern Himalayas. It represents the pinnacle of that fleeting, controlled ecstasy she first felt in the crib.
She captures it, kills it with ethyl alcohol, and mounts it, neatly spearing its thorax with a pin.
As she traces her own antenna, she is satisfied. The killing and containment of this rare butterfly perfectly mirrors the emotional and sexual containment she achieves over the men she hunts. It's scientific control over her own ecstasy.
And the final chilling act is the methodical disposal of the identities of the men she uses. She burns one man's driver's license and scatters his wallet and clothes in piles of rubbish.
It's the ultimate detachment, disposing of identity like an insect discarding a carapace after a molt.
So from there, we have the story of Leda, which directly confronts the mythology of violation and rebirth.
It turns a classical myth Leda and the swan into visceral, clinical body horror. It begins, though, with the husband's profound failure of connection.
Right, the misguided dragonfly stage. He buys the earrings, the sheets, the pajamas.
And he attempts this sweeping romantic gesture by secretly hatching and releasing 1,000 blue, silver, and purple dragonflies.
But Leda just dismisses it. She notes, they look different from the ones on our pajamas. He's totally incapable of giving her a real experience. He only offers her decorative versions of nature.
And the attack itself is raw, confusing, and immediately physical. Leda is raped by a swan in her rose garden. She describes the bird as much heavier than I ever thought.
The horror is in the psychological conflict. She was hitting it, trying to get away, but at the same time she didn't want to hurt the bird. Her mind couldn't compute why a creature of beauty would be the source of such violation.
And the aftermath takes the form of this medicalized mythology and terrifying clinical absurdity.
She calls a rape hotline, and the counselor doesn't believe her. Everyone loves swans, right?
In the hospital, the disbelief persists. The orderly, H.O. McKill, later recounts the situation. He notes the attending physician calls in Dr. Hogan, a veterinarian, for the 20-pound egg delivery.
The medical profession is forced to treat a mythical violation as a physical, zoological reality. The whole situation is insane, but it's being handled with this horrifying clinical absurdity.
When Leda wakes up, the husband is sitting on the egg, crying, thinking it's a noble act of devotion.
Leda violently insists he get off, demanding he not make the baby sad with all your sad energy. She eventually grabs the egg, holding it close, understanding that whatever he was loving, it ain't about me.
She is asserting control over her own trauma, separating her experience from his performative grief. The hatching is the moment of ripening. The egg shakes, and for the first time since the attack, they hold hands.
It's this moment of fragile, necessary human connection.
Leda's praying, please let my baby not be a swan.
And what emerges is a grotesque compromise. The baby displays no beak, which causes Leda to laugh.
But that laughter stops immediately, because a second mouth appears right beside the first one. This impossible birth, the two mouths side by side, it's the terrifying physical manifestation of the trauma. It's the violation and the motherhood merging into a single impossible form.
It's the ultimate sign that the trauma isn't just a memory. It's a prominent biological reality that now speaks alongside her child.
Okay. If those last two stories dealt with physical transformation, this next one explores madness not as an internal illness, but as a highly destructive, contagious superstition that fractures reality itself.
This is the story of the editor Henry Wilson and the writer Red Thorpe, who is consumed by the Fornet delusion.
Red Thorpe believes in Fornets, these tiny nocturnal creatures that dust good luck for us. This started as just a writer's whimsy, but it accelerated into an outright, fully materialized belief, a flexible fantasy.
And the tragedy begins when Henry Wilson, the editor, who is drunk, lonely, and professionally burnt out, decides to join in the game.
Henry is a gatekeeper of reality. That's his job. But he starts this correspondence with Thorpe, and he invents his own Fornet, one who loves Kirshner's Bologna.
He's playing a professional game, not realizing how devastatingly real this fantasy is to Thorpe, who thinks he's found a kindred soul.
And Henry's own descent is marked by this increasing paranoia, specifically about electricity. It reflects the anxiety of the modern wired world.
He believes the whole office building is wired up like a terrorist bomb, generating loose volts and buzzing fluorescence that cause him physical pain.
He has his phone and electricity turned off at home, seeking total insulation from this. But then he discovers the one live item, an undetected, single-eyed smoke detector on the ceiling.
He feels these large, clear bursts of pain, like radio waves, going through his head, and they're emanating from this one mechanical object.
His paranoia is reaching critical mass. He's thinking of moving to the Adirondacks. But before he can escape, the Fornet delusion, which he helped nourish, manifests in his den.
The sunset creates an eerie furnace light. He hears the distinct sound of a typewriter pletin hitting paper.
Now, hold on. Isn't calling madness a flexible bullet a bit dismissive? I mean, doesn't that ignore the pathology? Or is the point that in horror fiction, the cause matters less than the collateral damage?
That's precisely the focus here. The story argues that the effect of the madness is more important than the cause.
The fantasy that Henry allowed himself to indulge becomes a mechanical reality. The paper in the machine is actually wallpaper rolled into it, and it's typing out the name of Thorpe's specific Fornet. First Rackham, then Rackney.
And then there's the terrifying visual confirmation that this shared delusion has physically invaded his world.
An incredibly tiny hand emerges from between the B and N keys, curls into a fist, and hammers down on the spacebar before drawing back inside. The shared fantasy is no longer a mental construct. It's a physical entity typing its existence into his home.
The true horror, though, is how this madness, this flexible delusion, explodes outward and affects innocent people.
Thorpe becomes convinced that his Fornet, Rackney, is being killed by Jimmy Rulin, the young son of his cleaning lady, Gertrude Rulin. The boy is just playing with a toy death ray.
Thorpe rushes in, screaming, "You're killing Rackney!"
Jane, his wife, grapples with him, trying to stop the violence. He shoots her, shattering her left elbow and tearing along the side of her skull. The margin for survival was 1/8 of an inch.
As Jane intervenes, she saves Jimmy Rulin, though Thorpe does shoot the boy in the left buttock. But the bullet doesn't stop there.
It exits the boy's thigh, passes through Jimmy, and lodges in Gertrude Rulin's shin. Thorpe then commits suicide.
The editor's final conclusion summarizes it perfectly. Madness is indeed like a flexible bullet.
It's unpredictable and rarely lethal to the intended target. Thorpe was trying to commit suicide, and instead the madness passed through 3 innocent people, leaving chaos and injury in its wake.
And any attempt to understand it is futile, like trying to understand how a Mobius strip can have only one side.
The horror is realizing that your anxieties are contagious, not contained, and that reality offers no protective shielding against the delusions you help create.
Okay, if the last section dealt with internal transformation and contagion, this final part tackles existential dread. This is where the world itself loses structure and collapses into absurdity, cruelty, or just total nihilism.
And we start with The Architect of Folly, a story about Roland Turner.
A highly specific character. He's dedicated to the Folly Fellowship. He's obsessed with structures built with deliberate disregard for the normal rules.
He celebrates the heroic zaniness of American follies, like a house built of beer bottles or a Noah's Ark home.
His passion is finding serious architectural abnormality, which leads him to Jorgensen's vast, scattered Little Italy.
He finds villas, towers, piazzas, and statues going on as far as Roland could see. It's an overwhelming, abnormal, and strangely beautiful architectural landscape.
But his admiration for the disregard of rules leads directly to his capture by non-human creatures.
And they're not classic monsters. They're described as these grotesque parody scientists. Pinched little faces, stubby fingers, moving with a manic bustle, communicating with insect jabber.
He realizes that, in exploring this architectural violation, he has violated their sacred, bizarre ground.
And the horror is the systematic and utterly grotesque transformation of Roland into a piece of architecture himself. This isn't a quick murder. This is them making him part of the folly.
They chop off his wrists.
That detail implies they're disabling his capacity for action. He's rendered utterly passive. He can't create or destroy. He's forced into just observation.
His body is encased in stone and wire mesh up to his neck, and he's positioned on the third rank of the statuary.
Then comes the final, truly unique and sickening detail. The captors yank the rags out of his mouth and thrust a specific device inside.
A wire cage containing loose, grooved wooden balls.
This isn't just torture, it's forcing him to become music. The wire cage is secured so tightly it forces his tongue to the floor of his mouth. As the wind blows, the balls dance and bounce, creating this additional, involuntary sound.
It makes Roland the newest unwilling, suffering statue in Jorgensen's bizarre chorus. The irony is just brutal. His passion for heroic zaniness is used against him.
He's forced to become a permanent, tormented folly that sounds as ridiculous and agonizing as it looks. He is literally the architect of his own collapse into absurdity.
From architectural collapse, we move to moral collapse. This is the story of Lucas Fisher and the consequences of emotional reservation.
The belief that you can stand apart from life's messy complexities. Sprake, a cynical observer, offers this harsh assessment of Lucas Fisher. His reluctance to give himself wholeheartedly will inevitably make him shabby and unreal.
That is a devastating prophecy. Being shabby and unreal is worse than being evil. It's a fear of not being remembered, of not having lived deeply enough.
And the story illustrates how reality begins to fail those who refuse to engage with it. One friend, for example, avoids the museum after seeing a profound break in reality.
He was looking at a medieval miniature, a coronation procession, and he saw part of it move.
4 men carrying a coffin and a small figure walking under an awning, not with the bishops.
That is so subtle, but it's terrifying. The historical past, the certainty of documented reality, is literally shifting before his eyes. It threatens the certainty of the whole collection, the stability of the historical world.
The main narrator seeks help for their friend Anne, who is deeply disturbed, suffering a migraine, and hearing smiling creatures in the passage outside her house.
When the narrator desperately calls Lucas Fisher for help, the result is the ultimate confirmation of his emotional cowardice.
Lucas simply takes his phone off the hook. He chooses silence and reservation over messy, traumatic engagement. The narrator is just left whispering, "Fuck you, Lucas."
Prefers his own reality to remain intact, even if it means abandoning those who need him.
And the conclusion confirms Sprake's prophecy. Lucas is seen later being followed by a small figure.
Neither child nor dwarf, but something of both, with stupid and implacable eyes. The figure imitates Lucas's typical walk.
This small figure is the physical manifestation of the self Lucas has refused to give to life. It's the cost of his chronic insulation and reluctance, made external and implacable. The visual sign of being shabby and unreal.
Lucas, unable to get rid of this persistent, pitiful shadow of himself, is heard pleading, "Why don't you leave me alone?"
The answer is that the world can't let him remain incomplete. The burden of the self he avoided has now materialized to haunt him.
Our final source text introduces a character named Little Red, who has fully accepted the collapse of the world. He's articulated a formal philosophy rooted entirely in existential dread and resignation.
Little Red lives by a series of aphorisms that just reject comfort, resolution, and forward motion. He states clearly that resolution and restitution exist only in fantasy.
If the realistic technique promises cause and effect, Little Red just dismisses the very concept of a satisfying ending.
And he rejects the core motivator for so many people. Happiness is primarily for children. He sees happiness as a temporary state, unsuitable for the adult condition.
His core operating principle is total acceptance of brokenness. Learn to live broken. It's the only way.
He even philosophizes that dirty dishes are just as sacred as clean ones. This acceptance of decay is central to his horror.
And this resignation manifests physically in his environment. His sitting room has devolved into what the sources call a progressive squalor. Empty bottles of Beck's and filthy dishes are piled chest high.
And they've become organic, as if they have literally grown there over decades, achieving a life of their own. It's the accumulation of entropy made visible.
Despite his isolation and broken life, he's perceived as a mystery and a kind of reluctant guru. People seek him out.
The mystery of his existence is deepened by this cryptic encounter with a blind man outside the Korean deli, dressed elegantly in a dark blue pinstriped suit.
The man, shaking a cup for coins, tells Little Red that he always knew who you were, and now
I know what you are.
That is a terrifying note to end on. It suggests that Little Red's true nature is fixed, known, and perhaps terrifying to those who can truly perceive it, even if he himself only endures it passively.
He may be broken, but that brokenness has given him access to some fundamental, awful truth about human existence.
So looking across all these diverse techniques and profound themes, from the causality of Dr. Cause and Prophetic to the total existential collapse of Little Red, what's the core realization?
I think the core realization gained from these excerpts is that the most terrifying horror today is profoundly personal and psychological.
The external monster is almost always secondary.
Exactly. The horror isn't the creature. It's the way trauma genes suppress rage, Jane's violation, Lita's assault, transforms the protagonist's body or reality. It forces them into a state of unnatural being or destructive obsession.
The shift is fundamental. We've moved from trying to defeat a demon in a haunted house.
To realizing that the demon is simply the honest, externalized face of your own psychological inheritance. It's the man on the ceiling showing you bits of my own face in his, or the small figure imitating the walk of the self you refuse to live.
So our final takeaway then, it rests on this distinction between the realistic story, where cause and effect provide a kind of framework of comfort, even if that comfort is decay.
Right, versus the traditional Gothic and experimental modes where the world itself is rendered unreal, abnormal, or just a necessary lie.
The ultimate knowledge gained is that sometimes, like the narrator of The Man on the Ceiling, you have to admit that the love, the miracle, or even your own life may have been fabricated all along just to shield you from absolute nihilism.
And the terror lies in the unmaking of that fabricated reality and the inability to let go of the pain that caused you to build those lies in the first place.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought from our sources. It's built on this theme of lingering mortality and shared identity, and it stems from the story of an archaeologist and his twin sister. They had made a pact when they were young. Death was somehow to be held in abeyance until both halves of our twin's soul had succumbed.
This idea of a shared, lingering mortality, it really builds on this entire deep dive. It suggests that your deepest, most terrifying connections might be inescapable, that your fate is linked to another or to your trauma until both parts of the soul are finally released.
Something to mull over as you navigate your own reality. Until our next deep dive.